Hello everyone, welcome to my studio. Well, this is a quarantine episode of my YouTube channel. No long hike for me today. I have been taking walks around the neighborhood. I hope you are getting out in nature as much as you can as well, while also staying safe and following the CDC guidelines. So today I'm doing a painting of some blossoming trees near where I live, but I'm doing it here in the studio. I took a couple pictures with the iPhone a few days ago, and so I've got a picture here to paint. I've got it laid out on the iPad where I can see it easily, kind of the right size, same size as my 8x10 panel. I've got the third lines laid out so I can quickly draw the composition in as I paint. Let me show you what I have on my palette. Right. For the initial wash, I'm going to use the Good Stuff distilled turpentine. I use Winsor & Newton. I got this on Amazon. Pretty inexpensive for a 1 liter container. I'm painting indoors. I don't usually use turpentine indoors. I use it outdoors. It can kind of make me nauseous sometimes if I use it indoors and I don't have really good ventilation. So while I'm using this today for the initial oil paint wash, I'm going to have the windows open. Even though it's a little chilly outside, I'll have the windows open and I'll have a ventilator fan running, and I'll only use it for that initial wash. So I pour a little bit of the turpentines in a little jar that I have specifically for turpentine. It goes a long way, so this will last me many months if I'm not painting outside a lot. On my glass palette here, I've got ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cad red, and yellow ochre. I'll use these for the initial wash, and I'll show you how I use that. I try not to use white, and I try not to use many of the other colors that are normally on my palette for the initial wash. And these are straight out of the tube. They're not mixed with any kind of medium yet, because I want the turpentine and the paint right out of the tube to dry kind of quickly. That sets up quickly, and then I can move along to the next step and try to get the painting all in one go if possible. As always, thank you for joining me. I hope you're staying safe and staying at home while we get through this crisis, and we'll all get through it together. I'm using a large number 12 Utrecht bristle brush for this initial wash. I have a smaller Winsor & Newton bristle brush here as well if I want to play with the wash just a little bit in some smaller details, but I'll do most of it with this larger brush. have the initial wash in now. It doesn't look like much of anything at this point. I'm going to let this kind of wash down the panel and set up just a little bit. Now I'll take this large, soft, synthetic brush. It's a watercolor wash mop, but I use it with my oil paints as a blender. So I'll take it and I'll blend the painting just a little bit to soften some of the edges. I'll use this number 6 rosemary synthetic flat, a little bit of mineral spirits, and wipe away the whites. Do the drawing by wiping away the lightest lights. That creates an interesting effect almost immediately, and also preserves the white of the panel to help the colors really pop. Before I wipe away the blooms, I find I need to redraw that branch. It helps me to get the drawing right. I use just a little bit of cad red and alizarin crimson and burnt umber and draw the branch in some of the darker red spots. as you know, if you watch this channel, if you watch my videos, I'm constantly experimenting. So on this painting, I'm trying to control my value groupings, meaning how dark or light the groups of color are. So kind of like a poster, I'm trying to lay down flat areas in the same value range. So you can see I've got a bluish and a greenish and a reddish dark, and a yellow and a red and a bluish medium, and a yellow and a red and a blue light value. So without mixing too much, I'm trying to maintain those values as I paint the picture. Go back at the end and add some splashes of color and some highlights and shadows where I don't pay as much attention to the value, but for the most part I want to stay in these three value groups. Now I'm going to mix up one more value group, the lightest lights. So I'll take some white, titanium white. It has a little bit of slow drying medium mixed in it already. I'll start with white because the highlights in the photo are almost white, but you can see when you hold it up against the colors in the photo, they range. Most of them are warmer. So I need to add just a little bit of yellow or alizarin crimson to the white. But if you start with yellow or alizarin crimson and then add white, you'll find it harder to get to that light that you need. So I find it easier to start with white on a clean palette and just add in the tiniest amount of clean pigment. So I've got a little bit of alizarin crimson here. Grab just a little bit of it and mix it in. A little bit of alizarin crimson goes a long way. Okay, can get a little on my knife, compare it to the photo, and that's pretty close. Maybe even a little too dark there, so I need to add more white to this mixture. So I'll do the same with a yellow and a red, just the slightest amount of pigment added to white will get me there. You can see I've mixed up a very light pile with just a touch of alizarin crimson, pile with just a touch of cad yellow and cad red, and then here's the same pile with just a little touch of ultramarine blue added in for a nice lavender, very light lavender. So you can see this value, hopefully it's coming through on the video, this value is a little darker than these two, but that's one of the highlights I'm seeing in the picture. I want to capture that lavender tone that is just a shade darker than these, kind of in between this value range and this value range. So I'm trying to keep the value groups minimized, but not being too rigorous. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 value ranges, and that's a pretty good rule of thumb. 4 or 5 value ranges on a painting. If you can accomplish that, you're doing pretty well. I had a question on Instagram recently. Someone asked me why the gray background on this glass palette, why not white? And I think it kind of depends on the artist, depends on what you're accustomed to and what you like. But for me, I like the gray background because if I have a white background, a bright background, it makes it harder, for me at least, to judge value and color. So if I hold this up against the pure white, it's harder for me to judge how that value is going to turn out on the painting, whereas holding it up against that gray background, it's easier. And the background of your painting doesn't have to match the background of the palette exactly, but it helps. You can see how light that is against that gray, that lavender gray background that's already on the painting. So that's why I use a gray background. I think a lot of artists would say something similar, that it's easier to judge color and value against some kind of middle tone rather than an extreme tone. Okay, for painting these highlights, I'm going to use a Rosemary & Co. Masters short flat. Has a nice firmness to it, but also very soft edge, very soft end of the brush. So you can get some really nice soft effects, but also if you paint with the sharp knife edge of the brush, you can get a line. If you paint with a flat, you can get a larger stroke. So Rosemary & Co. really wonderful brushes, best I've used, and they just last and last if you take care of them, which to me means don't let the paint dry in the brush. They'll last indefinitely. They'll just wear down, get shorter, and you can use them for years. One thing to note when you're painting flowers or almost anything where you have some real white, some real very light highlights in the scene, add just a little bit of warm, add some red or yellow, just the tiniest amount. That'll help your colors to not appear chalky in the final painting. When you're painting the highlights, you want to make sure you keep your brush clean. So dip it in mineral spirits and wipe it off once in a while. The light paint will get contaminated by darker paint from your canvas or from your panel very easily. So make sure you wipe it off almost every brush stroke. Keep those highlights really clean. I like to lay on the lightest lights on the space on the panel that I left for it. Paint I put down earlier with that diluted turpentine wash stays down. It doesn't pick up on the brush. However, if I get off into an area that I've painted more recently, the brush will pick that paint up, and I don't want that mixing into my lightest highlight. So I will stop pretty often, swish my brush in mineral spirits, and make sure it's nice and clean before I continue painting the highlights. Okay, now as I get down to the smaller detail, I've gone to a little smaller brush. Now I'm using a Rosemary & Co. Pure Sable with a long handle. This is a brush that's good for watercolor or oil. I really like it for some of the final stages of an oil painting. It has a really soft tip that holds an edge, but also has some nice body, some nice spring, so it can carry the paint and apply the paint without falling over. Does a great job. You can see here I've switched to a Rosemary & Co. Ivory Filbert. It's a synthetic brush. Again, it's got a soft, sharp point, but nice body. Carries the paint really well and lets the paint flow on the canvas really well. So switching back and forth now between the different brushes, trying to get different effects. I find if you vary the brush size and brush type, it makes a more interesting painting. It forces you to use some different approaches, and then you just get used to using certain brushes certain ways and getting those effects you want. Alright, now I'm getting even finer detail. I've switched to a Pure Sable round with a nice long sharp tip. It's a number 0 Rosemary & Co. round. I'm going to add some of the little fine lines I see in the painting. Alright, well that's it for this painting. I hope you enjoyed the process, and hopefully it was a little distraction from your current worries. You get out and get a little exercise, but stay safe while you're out there, and I hope you have some time to do some painting. As always, thank you for joining me, and if you like these videos, please like and subscribe.